Hello and welcome to episode 42 of the Adoption Fostering Podcast with me, Scott Casson-Rennie, no BE, and...
Me, Al Coates, MBE.
I thought I'd get that in before you did.
I know you did. There's no need to be jealous, though. It doesn't become you.
I'm not jealous.
No, it's fine.
You think keeps on bringing it up. Imagine my horror looking at that yesterday.
You started it. Well, what? Explain to people who don't understand.
So just in case, because I'm sure that most of our listeners come from Twitter, but just in case they don't, on Twitter yesterday, I don't know when you did it, actually. That's a worrying thing. It could have been on there months. I don't know. So in the description of our podcast on Twitter, it says who it's introduced by. And he's put Scott, and then he's linked at Gay Adoption Dad, and then put no BE at the end of it. And then he's put Al, at Mr. Al Coates, MBE. And I was, I don't know how long it was on there. It was quite funny. I just thought I'm going to make a thing of this just for the sake of making a big thing of it.
Yeah, go for it. I'd knock yourself out. It only reflects badly on you.
Well, yeah, whatever.
Yeah. How are you? You been busy?
Very busy, yes, as always. Yeah.
Ironing?
I can't even think what I've been doing.
You're so busy you don't even know what you're doing. Yeah.
No, not yet.
That's fine.
No.
Yeah. Everyone's busy, though, aren't they?
No, exactly. We're all busy, aren't we?
We're all busy. We've got kids.
You're always busy. You're doing your CPV thing, Bob, aren't you? CPVA, whatever it's called.
The good doctor is tormenting me. She's told me that if I don't do it this week, she's literally going to come round and stand over me while I write it.
I would be worried that she'd stab me if she came round to my house, to be honest with you, because now that she's retired, she's got
she's got time on her hands.
She's got a list.
Oh yes, big list. Very scary. So that is really exciting, and it's frying my mind, but it's very exciting. So that's cracking on. But we've had lots of. My life is becoming like a game of adoption bizarreness bingo. I've got a full line, and I'm going for the whole house.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
With 6.
No. Let's recount that number because things are getting really weird. Because, well, one of my so Paula keeps saying to me,
"You're a granddad."
Yeah, I'm a granddad. So Paula keeps saying we don't have enough room. I was going, well, we downsized to this house. We downsized so we could because we don't need as much room. She went, no, we don't have enough room. And then she's been waking in the night having bizarre dreams about extending into the loft and things. And then I realised what she meant because actually Ginger came back from university.
Yes.
Yes, right. And then one of my daughters who had, how shall we say, been away. That's a nice way of putting it. Returned with child. She is in the family way. And then it dawned on me that we don't. That means that there's more. That's another one. That's 2 coming in, and we don't have enough bedrooms. So we're up. Yeah. There's 3 of them in 1 bedroom tonight because we've just got no room left over. And I downsized because of this with the idea of me moving into retirement, having less children. But clearly that's.
And having been at your house, it's not small.
No,
to be fair,
it's not small. We're back to 9, and then when baby comes, which is in August, that'll be 10 of us in the house. There's never been 10 of us. No, 9 of us. I don't know. I've lost count. I'm blooming no count.
Well, you're like the woman that lived in a shoe.
I am.
Basically,
the woman that lived in a shoe.
What you need to do is buy a little hotel somewhere.
A wee hotel.
A wee hotel.
A wee hotel. Oh.
Oh dear. So Grandad again, is it? Grandad Al again?
Grandad number 2. Yes, and rather bizarrely.
They're coming thick and fast, aren't they?
Yes. Oh, it's.
Oh, I may not have an MBE, but at least I don't have grandchildren.
Well, it's a very peculiar feeling, I'll tell you that for nothing. Because I
can imagine.
My youngest child is only 5 years older than my grandchild, so it's just really, really peculiar feeling. I'm starting.
Oh dear.
The edges are fraying somewhat. Anyway, what else? Have you been anywhere exciting?
Well, not since FASD conference, actually, no.
Oh, and that was a good podcast. I listened to that.
I know, and you said to me a couple of times that it was really good, and I mean, I just did what I had to do. I just wanted to get the facts, and what have you.
I think you would make a great Kate Adie. A roving reporter with your microphone into danger situations. You would be wonderful.
The delay was terrible. I felt really bad about the delay because we were literally passing one mic round. But, it just needed to be done. And bearing in mind, half of my suitcase was taken up with podcast kit.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any luggage allowance. So, I literally had one pair of pants. I had to,
did you fly?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Good grief. The life you live is I just can't begin to imagine.
Yeah. And, if it was...
I'd have put you on a megabus if it was up to me.
Yeah, you
I
would
was Sue
well.
Armstrong Brown.
4 days later, Scott appears after the conference.
A memo from Sue Armstrong Brown. From now on, all transport must be via megabus.
No, it was Ryanair. Same thing, to be fair. You have to stick your arms out the window and make it fly.
Yeah.
So,
that's
no, not since then.
Excellent.
Oh, well.
Cool. So today we've got Beth Neil, the good professor, Dr Beth Neil, and bless her. A long time ago, because I ponder on research stuff, I saw a name and I was looking at the research she did, and it was really interesting. And I bought a book. It was quite old research, but it kind of really hit the nail for me about contact and how it is. So I'm really excited to have her on. And I haven't met her before, but you know what? She was incredibly rude to me the first time she ever met me.
Was she really?
And you were there. You stood next to me. You must remember this.
When was that at the...
Yeah, that thing.
That thing with you.
Yeah, she came up to me and she said, "Oh, you're wearing that shirt then?" And that was the first thing she said to me.
Oh, and that was interesting, actually.
Yeah, because that was my lucky shirt that everyone knows about, my red and black.
That everybody knows. Your lumberjack shirt.
Yeah, my lumberjack shirt. But anyway, I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, for special occasions. You're wearing that for your MBE next week?
I was hoping to, yeah.
Yeah, I bet you are as well.
No, I would if I could.
I'm sure the great Mrs. C has something else rolled up in a hanger somewhere, ready for that's been.
She's all kitted out. I've been trying to lose weight to get back into a suit.
Lose weight?
Yeah.
Have you been taken out, Al?
No, because it's 5 years to the month that I qualified as a social worker, and I was like a wraith. And I've just basically eaten biscuits every day since then. Nothing but biscuits. So I'm fat as butter.
Those are good ones that they give you as well, aren't they? Because you want to impress social workers.
That's true, yeah. You go on Foxes.
Not just cheap British tea, is it?
No. Not Foxes and M&S and Waitrose.
Yeah. So are you going to do a special interview with whoever presents you with your MBE next week?
I'd like to. I thought I'll ask.
Sing the lot. Just take your microphone in. Have your phone in your pocket.
Yeah, I'm hoping it's going to be Meghan Markle or Meghan Windsor. I can't believe that I had this argument with Flossie and Lottie on the morning of the wedding, and I said,
as well, yeah.
I was saying to her, this is really interesting because they are. I was explaining, I was giving them a little bit of history lesson, and they were really bored and pretending to listen to me. I went, because she is black, and they looked at me. And this is Lottie, who is black, and she went, "She's not black." I went, no, she is black. And it's a big deal, and she went, "She's not black." And I was going, look, there's been nothing in the news, but about how Meghan Markle isn't white. At least we can say she's not white, and she just wouldn't have it. Absolutely wouldn't have it. Denied it to the end. So I want to go to the palace, and I want it to be Meghan Markle, and I want to say to her, "Look, she's black."
Yeah. And it just proves that black girls can become princesses or duchesses. I think Duchess of Sussex. Isn't it? Yeah.
Lottie wants to be a barrister, so.
Well,
Mainly because, Flossie, she always wanted to be a policewoman because she wanted to taser me. Actually,
that's a dream I've got as well.
What, Lottie tasering you?
No, you tasering you myself sometimes.
Yeah. There was I'm laughing because I woke up early and I was texting you before you got up. So you woke up the other day.
At 5:30 this morning or something. Yeah.
So there's a big list of things I want you to do for me. Anyway.
Yeah, listeners, this is what happened this morning. Okay, in all seriousness, I got a list of texts from Al before I even woke up this morning. My alarm was going off, and when I switched my alarm off on my phone, all I could see was Al Coates. And it was like waking up from a bad dream into a nightmare. And I can't even remember what you were asking now.
No.
Literally blocked out. Anyway.
No, it's let it go. Right, okay, shall we put this
back to Beth Neil.
Beth Neil. We'll put this interview with Beth Neil, and then we shall return to it. So here we go. Yes. Beth Neil. Well, hello and welcome to Professor Beth Neil. Hello, Beth.
Hi, Al. Hello.
Hello there.
Hello, Scott.
Hello, Beth.
Before we start, can I clarify, because in my head I've been reading little bios of you. You're a doctor and a professor. So is that Professor Doctor or Dr Professor Beth Neil?
Professor Doctor, I don't know. I don't know.
Why not?
Doctor's the one that you have forever. You know, once you're a doctor, and nobody can take it away. So I think that's the good one. Professor, well, you know, I leave work or go and work somewhere else. I'm not a professor anymore.
But that's interesting.
Oh, well, so can I ask you what you're a doctor of?
Okay, well, it's a PhD. So I'm in the School of Social Work, and my background's in social work, and my PhD was in around the topic of contact after adoption.
So can we fairly say you're an expert on contact?
Well, I've got about 22 years of kind of thinking about it for about 9 to 10 hours a day, probably some days more like 16 or 18. So I've got a lot of opinions, but I don't know if that makes me an expert because I haven't actually done it and lived it myself. So other people will have different and possibly arguably superior expertise, but I have thought a lot about it and studied it a lot.
Well, because if opinions make you an expert, then Scott is truly an expert on everything.
Okay, good.
Sorry.
Oh, aren't you funny?
Yeah,
yes,
I am.
Thanks
And
for that. Yeah.
I don't know about you, Scott, but I know that the minute we start to talk about contact, a huge Twitter storm occurs, especially or Facebook or wherever the conversation starts. So this has been a really passionate area of expertise that we're looking to get out of you. That was a really badly way of saying it. No, this has been a topic that I think I've been really looking forward to, and we've got lots of responses from different people and lots of different questions. And is that you probably can confirm that as well, Scott, can't you? That it's a much debated topic.
Yes, it does. Quite often, yeah.
Yeah,
and with passion as well.
Yeah, I think it's a very emotional topic and very important to, you know, adopted parents and adopted people and birth family members as well are all got a lot of concerns and feelings and thoughts about it.
So can I start? The really basic question is what, you know, you've talked about having such an investment of time and thought into this. Why? Let's really start a simple question.
Why this topic?
Yeah.
I suppose it's almost how I got into my PhD. It's almost like an arranged marriage, really. I didn't really have any personal experience in adoption. And although I'd worked as a children's social worker, I never worked with a child who was going to adoption. So the whole adoption area was quite strange to me. I really enjoyed studying my social work masters, doing my dissertation, which actually was around children and divorce, and the contact issue did come up there. And I wanted to go back and do some more study. And my supervisor, Professor June Thoburn, she's, you know, had a very long and passionate interest in this topic. So she got the funding to do this topic and then looked for a person to do it. So I was a person wanting to do a project, and she wanted to do this project. And I kind of thought, could I sustain an interest in this for 3 years, which is generally how long a PhD takes? And the kind of things that, you know, I knew I was interested in were family relationships, attachment, loss, separation, parenting, babies, children, teenagers, all that kind of stuff. So I thought, yeah, there's going to be a bit of that in this, and I think it will do me for 3 years, and then I'll see what happens. But then I kind of fell in love with the topic almost immediately, really, because it is, I think, everything that's interesting about human development, about families, about children, it's all there. particularly these key issues: loss, separation, identity. So I'm hooked now. I won't be able to give it up ever, I don't think.
I guess it's quite a defining lump of your career, isn't it? 21 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
Scott, do you want to work your way through some of the questions, Scott? Because we have got some questions. We always promise we'll ask them, and I think one of the reasons we do the podcast is because often people can't get to the events that perhaps you speak at or we speak at, so it's an opportunity for people to ask questions. So, Scott, do you want to start at the top, or have you got a particular question?
Yeah, I'll start at the top because we've got quite a few, haven't we? It's actually probably one of the most popular podcasts that we've advertised in terms of questions, Beth. So hopefully we'll get through them all. So the first one comes from adopter on Twitter, and asking what your views on supporting relationships with all family members of adoptees, and why do we use the clinical term contact? And there's another part to the question, but I'll let you answer that first before I go to
Okay, so the first bit about the whole of the birth family. Well, I mean, actually, this is something I'm often arguing for, that we need to think about the whole family. We need to think about who is in the family, first of all, that children would like to stay in touch with. Sometimes that is a parent. Sometimes children don't want to stay in touch with their parents, but they passionately want to stay in touch with their siblings or their grandparents. So, we found in our studies that contact with parents can be very worthwhile and valuable, but sometimes it's very difficult and tricky, and it can be risky. The contact that we've studied with siblings and grandparents often seems more straightforward, a bit easier, more likely to be positive. That's not to say we shouldn't do contact with parents, but I think, why cut off if a child has positive relationships with somebody in their birth family? That we have to think of that as an advantage to an adopted child. So why cut that off unless there's a good reason to do so? So I am, a strong advocate of contact with extended family members, but I think we also have to consider issues of actually just what's feasible and social exhaustion. Some adopted children come from very large families, and in their adoptive families, they've got brothers and sisters who also have very large birth families. And it's not actually feasible for adoptive parents to, promote contact with every single person in the birth family. And children need to have their connection to their birth family recognized and promoted, but they also need to build the connections with their adoptive family and live their life. And so these factors have to be taken into account as well when thinking about, who the child might see or be in touch with in other ways, and how often and how many people. But generally, I think we've seen so many fantastic positive examples of contact with grandparents, direct contact, but also letter contact, which is something that I think is rarely considered. Why don't we ask if those kind of exchanges could take place with grandparents? There may be situations where grandparents might find it easier to write back reliably, to develop a communication with adoptive parents, where grandparents can be a really effective kind of conduit of information and news between the adoptive family and the birth parents. So definitely to be thought about and considered, and I think can be considered for a lot more children than it is considered for. So, our recent survey, we saw 25% of children having the sibling, but virtually nobody having direct contact with grandparents. So, there's a lot more. There's a lot of potential there, I think, for more contact. Now, I'm using the word contact, which brings to the second question.
Nicely
now,
done.
This
nicely
is really
done. Oh, well done.
Oh, she's
segued into there. She's brilliant.
I could be a DJ.
That's why you're a professor.
This is a really interesting conversation. I've been kind of following people saying this on Twitter, and it's made me think. And I've started sometimes to use, maybe to talk about family visits. Now, one thing I think about this is that some people suggest maybe the term family time. But when, we've spoken to people about what contact is like, what does it feel like, what's the purpose of the contact? Some situations where adopted kids meet up with members of their birth family, it really does feel like a family time. And that would definitely be a better way of describing it. And actually, simply to describe it in that way could, I think, move on people's thinking about how those meetings should be set up and managed. Because sometimes we've seen in our studies of direct contact that the situation of the meeting is awkward, it's unusual, it's difficult, and it's not family-like. People meeting in unusual settings like family centres or public places where you haven't got all the normal trappings of family meetings around you, and you don't have a history with those people you're meeting with. So the meetings feel awkward and strange, and that can inhibit the kind of development of trust and collaboration, which we know makes for good contact. So actually, maybe just...
I was going to say, can I play the devil's advocate? Because I think that family time, families. I don't agree with this, but it's maybe something I have heard is that people, adopters, especially new adopters, might find that quite difficult. That language of family, because reflecting on my own experiences as a new adopter, maybe insecure or a bit naive or a bit, just finding my feet in this world, but then to introduce or reintroduce or reconnect with family could potentially feel quite undermining or press my buttons,
Well, absolutely. And I think that's the other side of it. And also sometimes contact isn't really the way people describe it and experience it is not like family. And the purpose of meeting up or the purpose of exchanging letters or communicating in other ways is not to develop a relationship or sustain a relationship. And actually, realistically, most children who are adopted are very young when they leave their birth families. Something like about 45% of adopted children have never lived with their birth family and haven't had a chance to develop a sense of family and family connection. Often to them, their family is their foster family. Yeah. So it seems
that's a whole other subject.
For some people, some people it's not the right label. And I think, yes, you're right about it could be experienced as quite a threatening concept for adoptive parents. Maybe it's better to use that term when it has become something that feels like family. The language should shape the experience, or whether the experience should shape the term you choose to use. But anyway, that's just a few thoughts about that one. But I tend to kind of press on using contact because people know what I'm talking about as well. And I think if I just switch to family time, it becomes something else. Yeah. And certainly that doesn't describe letterbox contact, I don't think.
Not at all.
I don't know what another term for that could be, but...
Yeah. What's the last part of that question, Scott?
The last part, sorry. I was absolutely kind of enthralled, especially the contact bit, because it's really quite interesting. And this is really interesting, this second part of this question, because I don't know that I would necessarily agree with it, but I'll be interested to hear your thoughts. And I'm going to say it as it's worded. Why don't social workers help adopters understand rather than fear this relationship?
Well, why don't social work? I do think a lot of the time social workers could do more to help adoptive parents understand contact. I think there's all sorts of reasons. I think, maybe children's social workers are possibly quite influential in shaping contact plans. Now, we know from our studies and that I think it's one of the most difficult things that social workers do is have to take children away from their parents. It's the most difficult thing, almost certainly, that a parent is happy, and very difficult conflictual relationships can develop between the local authority and the parent that I find it hard for a social worker then to entirely in all the more positive aspects of a parent. So, and as the child social worker, and I've been in this situation myself, sometimes line of that parent's very understandable and natural anger about what's happening to them. So you're seeing somebody who's behaving in a very angry way, in a very predictable, unreliable way sometimes. We've seen in our studies that parents, when they learn that they're going to lose their child to adoption, often their behavior gets more difficult because they're so upset and distressed.
Yeah.
So then you're seeing somebody who looks like they're not really a very good bet for being collaborative and purposeful in contact. So I think that's one side of it. I think social workers are worried about risks. Children are in care for a reason. I think there's still vestiges of old thinking about adoption is actually a fresh start, and we need to almost free the child from what could be seen as a slightly contaminating influence of the birth family. We need to give them a new start. Because they're saying, they're worried about being sued. This is a new kind of thing, it seems, a culture of being sued by people. There was a new one on me. It's the first time I've heard it. But, if there's a birth family were to maybe find out where an adoptive family were living and cause any difficulties, that the local authority might be sort of taken to court by adoptive parents or something. I don't know how common that is, but that's something somebody said to me recently. And the other thing these social workers were saying that I was talking to recently is it's kind of like people just actually maybe don't think too much about contact. They just do what they always do. This is what we do. It's adoption. We do letterbox contact once or twice a year. That's what we'll do. Next thing, next case, it's the same. The cut and paste mentality. And possibly, I don't know that social workers are actually fully informed about some of the research evidence about contact. I think the best contact arrangements we've seen are situations where mostly adoptive parents and birth family members manage everything by themselves. And so the very best forms of contact, so social workers working in after adoption teams never get to hear about, because it's self-managing and it's going along really well, and the family don't need any support and nobody gets to hear about it. contact situations that go horribly wrong, the agency is likely to hear about all of them. So there's maybe a skewed perception about how difficult face-to-face contact will be because the self-managing arrangements don't come to people's attention very much. So I think we end up in a situation where often contact is presented to adoptive parents as possibly something that they might have to consider putting up with or making an effort to do. And I think we need to start having conversations with perspective about how having contact of whatever type can be something that they can use to talk to their child about adoption, to help their child put together a life story, to make sense of what happened to them, to open up communication in the family, to show their children that they accept the feelings that they might have about the birth family, the questions that they might have. It's a very visible sign of that you sit down and write a letter to a birth parent, or you take a child to a meeting with siblings or grandparents.
As you're talking, you're giving me so many questions, and my head is exploding.
Please keep them in your head.
All right,
We've got enough questions.
But I'm just conscious that you've said so many things that have made me really that kind of chime in my head, and one of the ones which links into a question that someone had asked, an adopter called Emma Price, who got in touch with us on Twitter. She's talking as a prospective adopter that she's really worried about how her future children will react to contact. She said, sort of, I'm pro contact, but but I'm also scared of it. This idea that children sometimes wobble after contact or before contact. How does that counter with, you talked about evidence and the evidence for contact being very positive. What is that evidence, and how do you help adopters access that evidence?
Okay, well, first of all, maybe what is the evidence? Well, that's a question, really. You might have to hold up a sign saying "Stop talking" at some point.
Okay.
But I mean, I said contact can be positive. It isn't always positive.
Right.
I think every contact arrangement has a balance of positives and challenges. Usually there's something positive about it, even if it's a really small thing. I think that the benefits are around getting information, sharing information that can help the child put together about, can be quite simple things like knowing what a parent looks like or where a sibling is now, or they're around communication in the adoptive family, and sometimes they are around maintaining important relationships. So I think they're the three main areas where the benefits can be. Now, the challenges can be around contact, the things you don't learn, the things you can't find out, the questions you don't get answers to. So, I mean, letterbox contact, which is the predominant form of contact, I think is really interesting, possibly the number one question on the adopted child's left. But that complex, difficult, it's really, the child maybe needs lots of other resources to help them answer that question. Contact sometimes feeds in information that makes the child muddled and confused about their story, because the adoptive parents might be telling the story in one way, which is the story they've been given social services. A parent will might have a radically different take on that story, and they got their version. So that can be very challenging. It's very challenging to have these communications and relationships with somebody that you don't know. who has very intimate connection, because, say the birth mum and the adoptive mum or dad, the parent of the same child, but at the same time, you don't know each other. You may never have seen each other in the flesh. You might come from radically different backgrounds. So that's the real challenge as a medium. Actually, just to write letters is a strange medium these days. That is a strange medium. For an hour once a year, it's basically weird.
Yeah.
So there's children's emotional reactions, birth parents' emotional reactions, siblings' emotional reactions, adoptive parents' emotional reactions. It is never emotionally neutral. To receive a letter from your child's birth parent is never an emotionally neutral event. To receive a letter from your parent is never emotionally neutral.
Yeah.
So what we have to look out for is we mustn't have contact that is so challenging and so few benefits that it's actually causing more. In terms of reactions, I think, first of all, we have to accept it's natural that contact will and have a level of difficulty for children. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think that can be bringing to the surface stuff that's underneath.
Yeah.
And
I guess
when kids' feelings and questions come out into the open, adoptive parents can help many feelings out that a child just can't cope with.
What are the challenges that?
Okay, so challenges for adopters specifically.
Yeah, and for children, yeah.
Okay. So I think there is the emotions. So if we start with children's emotions.
Yeah.
Obviously, the most difficult situations are where children have established relationships with birth relatives. And then we have to think about the nature of those relationships. Now, I think the most difficult situations is where children have had quite fearful relationships with usually birth parents, and then contact can bring those fears to the surface again. And I think we don't actually want to have contact that makes children feel significantly frightened. I think that's not a good idea.
So is it reasonable to just not have those contacts? Is that a reasonable position for an adopter to take if they thought my child is being harmed? I guess it is, isn't it?
Absolutely. But I think if, and that might be the case sometimes, for example, contact with a parent who a child's had a very difficult relationship with, but there may be a different way the child can stay in touch with that parent if they want to, or there may be somebody else in the birth family who can offer something really positive to that child. So it doesn't necessarily mean no contact. And sometimes there's really difficult situations where children have had a difficult relationship with the birth parent, but they have strong feelings of connection and loyalty.
Yeah.
And we know children attached to parents, even in situations where they're abused and neglected. And some children really have very strong feelings about wanting to stay in touch with their parents. Now, to me, that's the most difficult decisions that we have to make around contact for these children. And sometimes we have to, maybe, if children are adamant, just try and keep that contact as safe and as manageable as we can, and help the child process and make sense of those feelings. But there might be situations where we need to say to children, we're really sorry, we know this is what you want, but, we as the adults and your parents, we don't think this is going to do you any good. And, why is it that you really want to see mum? Is it because, you need to know how she is? Well, perhaps we can find out how she is. And perhaps we can tell you, and you don't, and not going to see her, but we can help you with your questions and your feelings in other ways.
But as you said, there could be another family member who could offer that direct link and offer reassurance as well.
Yeah. But for other children, they might have had, a more positive relationship with a parent or a grandparent or a sibling. Some parents are loving and care very much about their children, but their circumstances overwhelm them and they can't look after them. And then the feelings for the child maybe are more around loss and missing their parents, or feelings of sadness, or why couldn't I stay with my birth family, or why am I adopted and other people aren't adopted. So these are all normal and natural feelings, and sometimes the contact brings them to the fore, or it can be just make a child feel different. Can make a child feel anxious about their belonging in their adoptive family. If I have to write to my other family, does that mean I'm not a part of this family? So there's all sorts of feelings that can come out. I have to say, a lot of kids in our study, we did a longitudinal study where we followed children up for 18 years. And most of these children were very young when they were placed for adoption. They were all under 4. And a lot of them were much younger than that when they left their birth families. And they didn't really have these kind of relationships, attachments to their birth families. And so the contact was more emotionally low key for them. So I think the older the children are when they're adopted, the longer they've lived at home, the more difficult and entangled their relationships is, the more stronger and mixed and ambivalent children's feelings are around contact. But the challenge is, the more they're likely to want it. These older children with complex relationships might have very strong feelings about you cutting off contact, whereas little tiny children who are coming into care very young, when they're small, they won't mind if they have it or if they don't have it. They might feel differently when they're older, but
it doesn't hold that emotional weight for young children.
Yeah, but actually, what a lot of adoptive parents said to me in my study was what they worried. We're talking now about face-to-face contact. They worried that if they took their child to see the birth parent or the grandparent, that the child would be kind of sort of running towards them saying, mummy, mummy, and they would feel very much out of the picture. But actually, what they described is, we took our child to the contact meeting and she didn't really remember who her birth mum was, although she'd been in touch with her when she was in care. She was like a stranger. She related to her more like she was a stranger, or possibly an auntie or something. And the children said that themselves. They kind of said, well, when I was seeing my parent, it felt more like seeing an auntie, but not an auntie that lives next door and you see every day, kind of a distant auntie who turns up once or twice a year. So I think, I would say to a lot of adoptive parents, don't overestimate how emotional contact might be for your children. If it's introduced at a young age, and if you're kind of cool and calm with it, children take the lead from their adoptive parents. And if you can feel kind of relaxed about it, and often children feel quite relaxed about it and they don't freak out about it at all. But with older children, it is more of a concern. So I think actually that's the main concern of adoptive parents, is how is it going to make my child feel? How is it going to affect them? Is it going to harm them? And they're all legitimate questions.
Yes, of course.
But mostly we found contact does not harm children. It will in some cases, but mostly it did not. It did not have any impact on children's overall emotional and behavioural development. It did not have an impact on adoptive parent-child attachment. It did not have an impact on how well the adoption was going overall. So I think we mustn't be overly cautious, because the research evidence doesn't suggest that we need to be.
That's good.
But I think the whole...
How do you get that message out, though? Sorry to interrupt you, but as you said, you've got 20 years of experience, and I'm just trying.
I know. I'm a motor mouth as well.
And I've got 9 questions, and we're up to 2, aren't we, Scott?
Yeah, we are.
Okay. I did warn you.
You did. It's I know. Please don't take it as a criticism. Go on. Right, you have a sip of your harmless fizzy pop, and let Scott think up another question.
Yeah.
So how do we get the message out there?
Well, yeah. How do we get the message? Well, it kind of is. Scott's looking. He's picking selectively out of the questions, aren't you?
I am. I'm going to have to, I think, aren't I?
Yeah. But I mean, I'll ask you while he's thinking about how do you get the message out? Because I heard you speak recently, and you said that things were worse, or there was less contact happening now than 20 years ago. Yeah.
That's what I'm picking up. That's what I've seen. I mean, we did this survey of over 300 adoptive parents last year, and we saw these tiny numbers of children having any direct contact with parents or grandparents, and actually quite small numbers with siblings. And compared to a survey I did of 198 kids 20 years ago, it was quite a few more agencies, adoptive parents, willing to give face-to-face contact a go. It was still a minority of children having that type of contact. So I think
does that suggest? Does that suggest then that the attitude is changing in a positive sense, but the practice is decreasing? Is that what you said?
No, I don't think attitudes are changing in a positive sense. I think they've been pretty much
entrenched,
the same. I think the conversations, the dialogues around contact have been the same. Now, I sense a mood of change just in the last year or two. A lot more people are saying, is this the right way to go about it? Should we be thinking differently? So I'm optimistic about that. I don't know kind of why things have gone backwards. I think some of it is maybe leadership from the top, because the government initiatives around adoption haven't really focused or even particularly mentioned contact, and when they have mentioned contact, it hasn't been particularly positive. So we had the consultation proposing that there should be a presumption of no contact in adoption, and Martin Neri suggesting in his introduction to that, actually, I quote, "Contact harms far too many children far too often."
Ouch.
So some of the messages from kind of the top have been either, let's not mention contact, the issues we need to think about are recruiting more parents, speeding up the process, eliminating delay, improving adoption support. So I think that doesn't help, and obviously professionals have had a lot of work to do to address all those other issues, and it's maybe just gone a bit on the back burner. I don't know. I think one thing that's closed down one aspect of contact is photographs included in letterbox. That used to be quite common because of fears about social media and people, maybe birth family members, posting those pictures on their Facebook pages or whatever. A lot of agencies have closed down that now, so that's possibly a reason. But getting the message out there, well, I think you guys do a great job on Twitter. I'm a sort of relatively new Twitter convertee, Twittery, if that's the word.
Yeah.
And I think,
let's not go there.
Kind of academics such as myself have to wake up and smell the coffee and realise that there's hundreds of thousands of people everywhere that have got absolutely no idea of this 22 years research that I've done. And why should people, when it's, in journal articles that are not terribly accessible. So, we're trying to do all our projects now. We're trying to do briefings and to make them publicly available and to start engaging. Actually, our audience is adoptive parents, is birth family members, is social workers. We've got to go to where people are and give people things that they read. So, we created an open access website with Research in Practice, and we put loads of research stuff on there, video materials. And
I was just looking at that today, which is really interesting. I hadn't realised that was there, but I think
millions of people don't know it's there.
Yeah, literally everyone who doesn't know it's there doesn't know it's there.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and it's one challenge is making that website. We cracked that challenge, and that was a lot of work. But then the second challenge is letting people know it exists. So,
well, we'll do that.
We will try and help. We've got 11,000 followers between us. So 12,000 if you include Fostering Podcast. So I'm sure we'll manage to do something with that. I think it's right as well. I think without kind of dissing you, Beth, it's only in the last couple of years I became aware of you as an individual, and I now that you've joined social media on Twitter, I think that gives you quite an opportunity actually to get that information out there. And it needs to be shared because this is really useful. All that kind of resource on the website. I mean, this could probably answer the majority of people's concerns about contact. So yes, we shall get on that.
We'll bang the drum.
And yes, we shall.
Thank you.
Good.
A really interesting question, which I'm interested in your answer as well, because I've always been quite intrigued by judgments in the courts in terms of contact. This one's from Adoption Adventures, again on Twitter, and the question is: if at placement order a judge ruled that X amount of contact, but then this was checked out pre-adoption order and hasn't been forthcoming, I don't know if checked out is the right phrase to use, then after chasing the LA, who else should I turn to? Hope this makes sense. I'm not sure that it does. But about the rulings with the judges, placement order, and then the difference between that and then adoption order.
Well, I'm not sure I entirely understand the question, but I think legally any order for contact that is made at the placement order stage is wiped out by the adoption order. But of course, the court can make another order for contact at the adoption order stage. But I wonder if the question is really maybe rather more about contact that doesn't happen and what to do about that.
I think so.
Do you think?
Because that is a question that I think you probably see as well, Scott. People saying, people saying, we've thought about this, we're up for contact. Yeah. My local authority says no. And that's a question I've had 3 or 4 times in the last couple of weeks.
I get that a lot. Yeah, I get it a lot.
Well, I wonder why they're saying no.
I mean,
I suppose it goes maybe back to those reasons I talked about earlier, but I think adoptive parents or prospective adoptive parents, should be asking, well, why? And, why not? And what are you worried about? And, to try to push back a little bit on that. If their feeling is it's something they want to do and try and,
is there any, is there a route they can take other than just asking social workers? Because often social workers are at the bottom rung of the ladder and they're probably just being led by their managers. What can they do? What realistically can families do?
When they want contact and that's being resisted by the local authority, well, actually, after adoption, if they have a means of contacting the birth family, they can do it anyway. And I've certainly, had people in my study who've opened up the contact after the order, and that might be quite soon after the order or some years down the line. But, some people have just decided, well, we're the parents and, we're going to get in touch with the birth family and see what we can negotiate. And sometimes that's worked out quite well. So that would be one route, but not everybody would feel confident in doing that, and it might not be advisable in every case. I guess you could ask, you could take research briefings or just talk to social workers about the evidence.
See what
say, what do you think about this then? You know, have you listened to Prof Neil's podcast?
Professor Dr Neil.
Yeah.
Oh, class. I love it. I love it.
And one thing I said to someone recently was, I said, because the doctor said to me, I know where this person is, and I could contact them on Facebook like that. And I said, well, what you could do is and the social services were sort of really resistant. And I said, well, don't give them an ultimatum in a nasty way, but say to them, look, I want to do this, and these are the reasons why I want to do it. These are the safeguards I'm going to put in place. I'd really like you to help me, but if you're going to dither around, I will just do it anyway. I'm going to do it, but I want you to help me. And sort of not put them on the spot, but kind of said, look, it's going to happen. This is the modern world. But we want your involvement. We want your input if possible. And that worked out for them, because the local authority went, actually, yeah, you're right. You're a grown-up. You're going to sort this out. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing adoptive parents could do is ask if they could meet birth family members. I mean, I know that does happen sometimes, but just to discuss it with the birth family. I'm all for more collaboratively bottom up developed contact arrangements, rather than the professionals saying, this is what we think you lot should do. Can we have more of a role in saying, right, you lot, why don't you kind of talk to each other, and we'll help you do that, and think about what might work for you, what is going to be feasible, what is going to be sustainable. That's really important, because the kids who are most unhappy with contact in our study were the ones where, it has started and stopped, or, their parents were writing and their birth parents, for whatever reason, couldn't write back. So we need arrangements that can be actually workable across time. So just try to push to actually negotiate that a bit with the birth family.
Yeah. See, I think that's a really interesting concept, because I think at the stage that you're at when you become a prospective adopter stroke placed with a child, I think that you're actually worried of risking anything to do with the placement, aren't you?
Yeah.
And in actual fact, I feel on reflection, personally, and this is personally speaking, I feel on reflection, I would have loved to have met the birth parents of my children, and I didn't get the opportunity. And that really gets under my skin now, because with the time that's passed, I feel I could have now, it's all very well saying this now, mind you, but now I would have had the confidence to actually go in and be quite, this is what we would like, and what would you like, and But I think it's really difficult, isn't it? And this kind of, we've kind of touched on it before, this as a prospective adopter, you're less inclined to challenge social work kind of options, decisions, etc. So it's really difficult to kind of, not use that experience, not have that experience to be able to do it.
Yeah, but I think it's an incredibly difficult time when everybody's thinking about what contact should happen. You do have to think about it when you're planning a child's adoption, but it's also the worst time to think about it, because adoptive parents, that's where adoptive parents will be feeling most insecure about all aspects of the adoption, and including contact. It can be quite a frightening prospect for prospective adoptive parents, because their relationship with the child is not yet solid. And a lot of adoptive parents have said to me, well, once they've made that connection to the child and they felt confident in their role as parents and with their connection with their child, then it's like, oh yeah, we'll do it now. But it's a scary time for adoptive parents. It's a terrible time for birth parents. There's no getting away from it. It's one of the most difficult experiences a parent can go through, is a compulsory adoption proceedings. So they're not and a lot of parents are fighting in their mind. Their child's not going to be adopted. They're fighting to keep their child. Once the adoption order is made, that's something just in itself that can help parents move and shift their position, and they think, right, okay, I fought for my child, I couldn't keep my child, they have been adopted, I know I'm not going to get them back, right, okay, what's next? And people will think differently about contact after the adoption order. And I think children as well, you know, some children can feel, once again they feel safe and secure in their adoptive family, that gives them a safe space to talk and think more about what they want to do about contact. So I think we've got to stop seeing that we make the decision about the contact. It's a one-time event before a child's even adopted. It's got to be an evolving conversation.
Yeah. And you raised an interesting point. Sorry, Scott, you going to say something?
No, I was just going to say, because that is a very similar message to the one about adoption support plans, isn't it? That they're only as good as the day they're written. As soon as that child's placed, everything changes, because obviously the situation is different, and as time goes on, things change. The needs of that child change. The needs of, you know, the adoptive parents will change over time. You know, initially it is still, regardless of whether we like to think that, you know, we've become, the majority of adopters who come forward are looking to help a child who's in need, if you like. I don't know the other place to word that quickly, but it's the same sort of thing, isn't it? You know, these things move on in time, and it's very much, it relates to the same things. You know, this old-fashioned view that on placement, this is what we've agreed, and this is what will happen. This is where the support will come in. This is what the contact will be.
Yeah.
In even 12 months' time, that is all up in the air. It's all changed.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And actually, you mentioned that meeting the parents, Scott, and that actually is something in itself that can really bring about a lot of change. That, you know, we've interviewed very, very few adoptive parents or birth parents who have regretted that meeting. Occasionally that does happen, but mostly people do not regret it. Mostly people say they end up with a better, more sympathetic understanding of each other. You know, birth parents say, I thought I was going to hate them. I wanted to hate them, but I met them and I thought they were lovely, and I wish that I'd had parents like that. And adoptive parents say, you know, I thought I was going to feel so angry with them and that they were going to be monstrous, and you know, I felt quite sad for them, and you know, I felt sad that for everything that's happened to them. So I think it's an important kind of really important to get those meetings going, but sometimes it's not possible to do that around the time of the adoption because of all the other chaos and the emotional chaos. So let's revisit it. Let's say, okay, so we couldn't do that then, but a year later, can we do it now? Again, it's but you know, sometimes it seems to be where you had your chance and you didn't do it, and now you've blown it, and it's not going to happen.
Do you think that links into the idea that, you know, which seems to echo through all adoption practice, is that once adoption happens, then it's a done deal. That's it. It's a moment in time. A child is adopted, and we're moving on, and everything's going to be okay. Well,
that is. Yeah, I suppose that was the dominant paradigm for so long, and we're starting to shift our thinking about that, but there's vestiges of it are still there. Really,
shadows.
It's not quite dead yet, is it? We need to keep plugging away on that one.
Can I ask about birth families? Because it's a question I think that a lot of people highlight, and foster dad Keith, great name, asked, you know, he makes a really good point. He says, I'm an articulate, reasonably well-educated person. Could I put everything I want to say to my child in one letter a year? I have to say, no, I couldn't. So I might not be able to write at all. Birth families need help with this. And that is precluding, you know, families, parents with learning disabilities, and perhaps a whole raft of influences on them.
It's letterbox is massively difficult, and to be perfectly honest, we have not seen, we've studied many contact arrangements, and we don't come across that many examples where a really rewarding letterbox exchange has been sustained over a period of years, because there's so many challenges. And so yes, for birth parents, there's the real first challenge for parents is taking in the information about what the hell it is and what they're supposed to do, because often parents are in such a highly distressed state mentally that the conversations that happen, sometimes they're not physically there because they can't bear to go to the meeting. Sometimes they might be physically there, but psychologically they're not taking it in. So a lot of parents we've talked to actually have not had a very good understanding of what is the purpose of the letterbox. So they might understand that it's about me getting a letter so I know my child is okay.
Yeah.
And they're not understanding it's about me sending a letter so my child has information about me. They don't understand that, and they don't necessarily always think of it themselves because they have internalized, this feeling of themselves as a bad parent, that they have, obviously the court has had to demonstrate that they are a bad parent. So a lot of parents we've talked to said, well, I don't know why my child would want to hear from me. I've got nothing to say. My life is not very good. It's not much positive to say. So a lot of parents don't conceive of why the child and the adoptive parents would like to receive a letter. So that's a challenge. Then there's the literacy problems. Then there's the fact that people are often moving house and their address changes. And then there's just all the massive emotions about the adoption and how can you put it in a letter. And then there's the fact that you don't even know who your child is anymore, as parents have said to us. I don't know what they like now. I don't know what they're interested in. So it's really, really challenging.
So can we say, maybe use as a headline and ruin your career, and say letterbox doesn't work? Could we say that? I'm just being facetious.
Sometimes it does work. Sometimes it does work. So
now.
Let's look at the positives. It works with birth parents who have maybe had a little bit more choice and control in the adoption process and are more accepting of the adoption, and who have some good literacy skills and who've been able to engage constructively in those earlier conversations, and who've met the adoptive parents.
So with every sentence, you're dwindling that number down.
Supported, and who are supported. Yes, every one of those things, when you look for it, it dwindles down to a small number. As I said earlier, I think we could bring in more grandparents. Maybe we might get it going a bit better. Sometimes it works absolutely beautifully, and it leads on to real relationships developing.
It's a minority, isn't it?
It is a minority. It is.
Stop thinking it's just easy. It's not.
It's not good enough.
I interrupted you.
Sorry, no, it's all right. I interrupted you. No, I was just going to say I've got three, all different situations. Actually, my youngest, the letterbox really, really works with his birth mum. We've never met her, but that wasn't our choice. But it works really well. She's very intelligent. She's very, and we only do a one-pager every 6 months. But we try and put as much information into that as possible. But that's with 12 years of writing these letters experience, if that makes sense. So, I would love to be able to sit down and say, you need to put this in, you need to put that in. But actually, you need to find out what works for you. And if you're getting that kind of response back, then obviously you're doing something that's okay. It's maybe not perfect, because you can't put in everything, can you? You don't want to brag too much about the fact that they're this and they're that. But actually... if it's factual and it's about their development and about their likes, then actually you wouldn't go far wrong with that, especially if they're engaging back with you and asking some questions that you can then answer again. I guess the trickier thing for me is about who is the letterbox contact between. Is it between the parents, so the adopters and the birth parents, or is it for the child? There's always a fine line with that one, because especially when the child gets to a certain age, it's a really tricky one to kind of address, for me anyway.
It is difficult, and say lots of kids are very young when they're adopted and they can't meaningfully participate in it, but and then that leaves a dilemma for the adopted mum or dad. When do I tell them? When do I involve them? How do I involve them? And we had some families in our study who got into quite tricky situations with that, thinking, oh, well, not this year because he's just starting school and he's got enough on his plate. And then the next year it's, well, not this year because, and not this year because. And sometimes then people got in a real pickle having to kind of tell adolescents all this had been happening for years and years and years, and by the way, we didn't tell you about it, and it caused a bit of a scene in some cases. So I'd really encourage parents to, much as we encourage parents to start using the word adoption and talking about it even before children can possibly understand it, that we can do something similar like that with contact. Just in the conversation, I'm writing to your birth mum this year, I'm telling her this about you, and I've had a letter from her, she said this. And even if the child doesn't understand it, it's about normalizing it rather than presenting it as kind of a surprise at an older age. And children have different feelings about the extent to which they then want to become involved in it as they get older. Some kids want to write a bit themselves, or put a picture in, or say something, or ask a question. And other kids we've talked to, they've said, I was just happy for my mum to do it, and just to tell me what, for her to decide what to say, and she can tell me what's in the letter from my mum, and I didn't really want to get any more involved in it than that. So there's so many individual nuances, which is why I'm so against this kind of standard cut and paste type formula. Things like, do you send it on the birthday or don't you send it on the birthday? Some kids go crazy in a bad way if they get a letter near their birthday, but other kids, that's the most meaningful point in their year to get a letter from their birth parent. So we've got to talk about it. What's right for you?
Are you optimistic for the future of contact?
I'm feeling a little green shoot of optimism. I have to say, over the last couple of years, because there have been times where I've kind of felt, nothing's changing. We get a lot of pressure on us in universities now. You've got to make impact from your research. I'm thinking,
absolutely.
Well, I can demonstrate that I've done a lot of research and said a lot of things, but I cannot demonstrate that anybody anywhere has done anything different as a result of it. But I do feel that there is maybe a growing recognition that the kind of standard formula that we've had of letterbox is quite difficult and not very satisfactory. I think another thing that's bringing about change is the whole finding of each other on Facebook scenario, that we're getting more realistic, that the prospect of maintaining a closed adoption over time is not very realistic, and that it might be more purposeful to meet children's needs in relation to loss and identity and wanting to know about their birth families, and birth families' needs of really needing to know how their child is. If we meet those needs, we're less likely to get into situations where kids either contact their families or are contacted by their families, and they do that without the support and involvement of their adoptive parents, because that can be pretty tricky.
I think
we want to avoid that.
Yeah, for me, that I think there'll be skeptics. I think there's people like Scott and I who are probably quite we're on board, and I think older adopters are usually on board. younger adopters, I think the compelling argument when I speak to them is, you are keeping your children safe by doing this, because when they're 13 and they get their first Facebook account, the birth family are one click away, and you have no control. Then you have no input to that.
Yeah. But I think we also, I'd really encourage adoptive parents to think, actually, maybe not to think about contact as the first thing, but to think about just their child as an adopted person and what they need, and the fact that, children are going to have extra challenges in building a sense of who they are and where they've come from and why they're adopted, all these identity issues. And so it's important for, not every child maybe can have contact, and it won't be right for every child, but every single adopted child, I would argue, needs adoptive parents who are communicatively open, who are open to talking and thinking about adoption, to exploring the child's feelings, to helping them put together their life story. And, we need to emphasize that with adoptive parents and say, well, in that context, you consider that if you've got some information from the birth family and you've met them, or you're exchanging letters or whatever, when your kid starts coming up with all these questions, you're going to have something to say about them. But also the fact that you're doing it is going to help your child feel free to ask those questions. So I think the whole adoption communication openness is something I'm pretty keen on.
Yeah, I mean, Yeah, I mean, our personal experience, we have two sibling groups, and our first one was very closed, but we were led by professionals. Our second time round, we fought for contact to a point where we almost, with certain family members, because the reality was that my children's parents were not safe people, and it just was not a good relationship, but there was other people. So we would see them weekly. They would come to our house, they'd come for birthdays, we'd go for birthday, and it became that all of the issues around life story work and identity and questions, you'd say, well, don't ask me, ask your auntie. I can't answer that, but your auntie will be able, and she was able to join dots that I could never join, and it just removed what could be a really complex issue, just removed it. It put it somewhere really safe. I am aware that we've gone over the hour, which is the magic hour. We've tipped well over. And you've
gone over my magic hour as well.
I'm about 5% into.
You've just touched this.
What I'd like to say, but
just got a little nail out scratching at the little surface there.
Yeah. Probably your listeners are crying at this point. Please stop that woman talking.
I very much like. Do you know what? That's the one thing when we have conversations like this, we're always asked for more, and I think that we keep saying we'll have people back. We've got guests that can take us into 2030, I think, in terms of having people back. But what's interesting, I think, about the whole contact thing is it affects every adoptive family and every birth family as well, in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's that there's no contact or that there's letterbox, or And you were talking about direct contact. I only know within my network of one case of direct contact, and I have quite a big network of adopters that I know. Close kind of friends and stuff, and that one in 12 years, that's quite it's quite amazing.
So it just made me feel actually how privileged I am to talk to so many people, because it is, when it works, it's so amazing. It's like absolutely the best of humanity, because the families in such challenging circumstances can come together and work together for the sake of their children. When it works, it's amazing. It's really amazing.
Well, I mean that's a great note to end on, because I think that's my experience. It's been a privilege. It's totally transformed my life in ways I never thought possible. So, thinking of future plans, have you got future research in relation to contact? What are you doing to kind of get your message out there? Well, you've got a website. Tell us about your website. What's on it?
Okay, so we've got summaries of the research that we've done, and then we've got little kind of practice guidance. I can't remember exactly what they're called, practice briefings. So
Yes.
we did a lot of consultation with social workers, and they said we want to be able to read it while we have a cup of coffee. We don't want to read your book. We want to read a leaflet that kind of gives us some hints and tips of what to do, but we know it's grounded in the research. So we've got lots of practice briefings on things like, we talked about meetings between adoptive parents and birth parents, how to plan and set those meetings up and how to support people, some hints and tips. That was developed by some of the social workers we work with who have expertise in that area. How to maybe negotiate letterbox and set that up. If you're doing face-to-face contact, what are some key things to think about? And talking to children about their feelings about contact.
So has that recently been put up? Is that sort of quite a new development?
That was put up, that website opened in March 2017, and we did have a little flurry of excitement about it because the Observer did a feature about contact in adoption, and I talked about it then, and they also talked to Amanda Borman.
Yeah.
And she talked about her child's contact and things. So that did drive a little bit of traffic to the website initially. We've now got a little bit of funding from the university, and my colleague Julie Young, who's worked with me on my contact projects, she's doing some workshops around the country and we've targeted that at regional adoption agency level to try and reach more people. So she's doing one in Leeds, she's doing one in Manchester or somewhere Manchester-ish, doing one in the West Country, she's doing one for CVAA in North London, and we're hoping to get one set up for the South London Adoption Consortium.
So that sounds like quite a clear programme to develop that and get that out to the workforce. And I know that it's something that Scott and I probably bang on about all the time. I write, almost every blog I write has some hint of it in, and I know Scott's you're always talking about something, Scott, but this is
never blogging about it.
No, you don't blog about it. You've got a no blog policy, haven't you, Scott?
Or a limited blog policy.
Yeah.
So, but I, like you, I think that there are green shoots.
Yeah.
And Andrew Christie at the Adoption Leadership Board sort of highlighted it as well,
yeah.
hasn't he?
Yes. Yeah. And the other thing I'm going to be doing where I think it's going to come up, I'm starting a new study actually on the 1st of June, and we're looking at adoptees who've had their own kids. So people who were in care and then adopted and who are now a parent. And one thing we want to explore with those adoptees, and also we're interviewing adoptive parents who've become grandparents, is where then does the birth family fit in when you have your own child?
Oh.
You know, so obviously these new kids that are born, they're going to have loads of grandparents because they'll have birth grandparents and adopted grandparents, and they have grandparents on mum's side, and so that's interesting. And does having a baby, is that something that makes an adopted person think again about their connection to their birth family? Does it make you want to get in touch with your birth family when you have a baby, or might it be the opposite? We don't know because nobody's really studied this area before. So that's a very exciting project with mostly, I guess, adult adoptees. So some people have babies when they're teenagers, so we'd like to talk to them too.
Okay.
And adoptive parents who've become grandparents. So we want to learn about all sorts of things, but we do want to look at this longer term perspective of how adopted people and adoptive parents think about and relate to the birth family across the lifespan, because it is, you know, everybody says it's a lifelong experience.
Well, that sounds
adoption
really interesting, and I think like Scott said, this has been I've just scratched the surface of this topic. We need to wrap up because it's getting late, and I know that Scott needs his beauty sleep.
Yeah,
it takes more than beauty sleep.
Yeah. Well, Beth, thank you so much for coming on the show, and I really appreciate your time and putting up with our inane questions and our interruptions.
No, it's actually really, really lovely to discuss these issues rather than just, sometimes just present them.
Yeah,
it's really nice to have conversations about them. So, thanks for everyone who sent in the hard questions, because they are the right questions. They are the questions we need to be thinking about. So thank you for your time.
Excellent.
And for giving me a chance to spread the message. So
excellent.
It's been great.
I think we will definitely have you back at some point, because I'm sure there's lots more questions to be asked, and we will definitely promote your website as well. Well, not your website, but the website that has all that resource and content, because I think that would be really useful for doctors. So
absolutely.
Great.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
then.
Thank you.
Cheers then. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Night.
Thanks, Beth. Bye.
Bye.
So that was an interview with Beth Neil, which I'm sure most people who are listening are either nodding or disagreeing. What did you think, Mr. Coates?
To be honest, I came away with more questions. But that's the nature of my head. I think that she clearly knew her stuff, and I thought, actually, why is this stuff? Why are we rooting around to try and find this stuff? That was my frustration.
Yeah. It's there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And actually, I feel a bit bad as well, because I've got the perfect platform to give her for it as well, with Adoption UK and stuff, and I've never really I knew it was there, but I didn't realise just what was there, I guess.
Yeah.
And just to be able to find that would be just well, it's there for everybody to take, and we'll put the links on with the podcast, won't we? But yeah, I think it's interesting because like I say, and I said to her during the interview, I've only known her maybe 18 months, 2 years, and she just seems to have popped up in terms of contact from nowhere, and that's just my own personal thing after 12 years. But she's been doing so much over the years to kind of develop and what have you. And I think, like you say, we've got more questions and we've probably got answers.
I mean, I didn't even get to it, but I think that actually contact is the defining issue. It will be the issue that adoption...
It always will be.
Yeah. If we don't address it, adoption will wither on the vine, because we need to be able to hold the tension of the needs of our children versus the needs of adoptive parents versus the needs of adoptive families, and that's the only one way where you can continue to kind of support all three. I think any other model, and people wither on the vine, I should have asked her about that, but anyway.
Well, we should have also asked her, because we had a question from Emma Mortimer, didn't we, about foster carers?
No.
And it's that sort of thing, actually. So that's why we do need to get her back. So maybe in a couple of months we'll get her back and we'll ask her some more questions.
Yes.
Because that is a really, really important. And we both know ourselves from our fostering days.
All back in the day.
But yeah, it's a massive topic. It's not one that's going. You compare it to the American kind of system of open adoptions and that contact to have. And, all right, it's different. I know it's different circumstances before you all start putting pen to paper and writing points of view. But
complaints department overwhelmed again.
Yeah, exactly. Podcast hours. But yeah, it's
It's very
a lot of food for thought.
Yeah. You mentioned fostering. We're hoping to get Mark Owers on the next. I've got his name right, Mark Owers, and he got back in touch with us and gave us some dates, so we're going to do that, because I think that Mark Owers is one of these people, you probably don't know his name, but if you look for his name you'll see it everywhere. He is everywhere. He's like that vine stuff that you get in the garden. So we're comparing him to a weed, are we?
Not quite.
No, we'll not do that, because he seems like a lovely man. And I reckon
he's a nice guy.
In a straight fight, he'd have us both.
I've got a handbag, remember?
Yeah, I can run fast, so he'd have to catch me. Yeah, so we'll get Mark on, and I think he was instrumental in the fostering stock take, but I know that he's got his own adoption story, but also he's very involved in... He's just one of these people who's really wise, and people listen to him, so I think it'd be good to get him on.
And he's got fingers and pies as well, because he's also involved in regionalisation and adoption agencies.
True that. Okay then.
Very interesting.
Yes. So on that note, I think we should go because it's late and I got things to do.
My bed.
Way past your bedtime. Okay. Well, look after yourself. I hope you have a smashing week, and I shall speak to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.